Okay, so today we're diving into a book that, well, it's a classic, but it also kind of feels like it's happening right now.
Yeah, you're talking about 1984, right?
Exactly. George Orwell's 1984, Big Brother, Thought Police, the whole shebang,
It's a book that just stays with you.
for sure. And we're going to take a deep dive into how some of the themes from 1984, this dystopian masterpiece,
Hmm.
are kind of echoing in today's world.
You know, what's fascinating about this book, it was written back in 1949, and it still feels so relevant today.
It's like Orwell could see the future or something.
I think it's more that he understood human nature, the vulnerabilities of power and the dangers of unchecked authority.
Right, how those things can play out in any society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a warning wrapped in a compelling narrative.
So for anyone who hasn't read it, like what's the basic premise?
Okay, so imagine a world where everything you do, everything you say, even everything you think is being watched and controlled by this all-powerful entity called Big Brother.
This is a bit creepy, right?
Say the least. There's no freedom, no privacy. Truth is whatever the party decides it is.
And it feels like there are some unsettling parallels with today's world, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Maybe not as dramatic, but definitely some echoes.
Yeah, for sure. Like, let's start with the surveillance thing. That whole Big Brother is watching you line. That's pretty chilling, right?
Absolutely chilling. In Orwell's Oceania, it was literal, with telescreens everywhere, monitoring people's every move.
Like those telescreens are smartphones the modern day equivalent? You gotta wonder.
It's a good question. Our location is being tracked, internet searches, social media activity,
It's all being collected and analyzed.
and let's not forget about facial recognition software, algorithms that can predict our behavior based on our online activity. Governments and corporations are using this technology on a massive scale.
It's like, have you ever talked about something with a friend and then suddenly an ad for that exact thing pops up on your phone?
Yeah, that's happened to me too. It's a little unsettling, isn't it? It makes you think about who's listening and what they're doing with that information.
Right. It's like, where do we draw the line between security and privacy? Especially in this super connected world we live in. It feels like we're constantly being tracked and monitored.
And that's the dilemma, isn't it? Are we willing to sacrifice our privacy for a sense of security? Or are we sleepwalking into a surveillance state?
Yeah. And speaking of control, there's this concept of newspeak in the book. It's basically a language designed to limit thought by reducing the number of words people can use.
It's like if you don't have the words to express an idea, can you even think it?
Exactly. Newspeak aims to make certain thoughts literally unthinkable.
And it's not just science fiction. We see hints of this in how language is used today.
Oh, totally. Like, think about all the euphemisms we use, especially in politics. Collateral damage instead of civilian casualties, enhanced interrogation techniques instead of torture.
It's sanitizing language to mask difficult realities.
It's like they're trying to control how we perceive the world by controlling the language we use to describe it.
Exactly. And then there's the whole world of social media algorithms, curating what we see and hear, shaping the narratives we're exposed to. It can create these echo chambers where we're only surrounded by information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Which leads us to another mind-bending concept from 1984. Doublethink.
Ah, yes. The ability to hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time.
The party slogan in the book is, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength." It's hard to wrap your head around that kind of thinking.
It's about control, right? Controlling information, controlling perception. And you see this today with misinformation and conspiracy theories running rampant.
People often hold contradictory beliefs based on what they see and hear online.
And those echo chambers we were talking about, they can make it really hard to discern truth from fiction,
It's like everyone is living in their own curated reality.
which makes it easier to manipulate public opinion and justify actions that might not serve the best interests of the people.
And this brings us back to that idea of perpetual war that we see in 1984, always having an enemy to keep the population in fear and under control.
It's a classic tactic. Think about the War on Terror, for example. It created a climate of fear and suspicion.
And that fear can be used to justify policies that erode civil liberties, increase surveillance, and limit freedom of speech.
Exactly. When people are afraid, they're more willing to give up their freedoms in exchange for security.
It's like if you're constantly being told that there's a threat, you start to accept those limitations on your freedom as necessary.
And that's the danger of a society that's constantly living in a state of fear. It can lead to the erosion of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about technology. In 1984, it's clearly a tool for oppression. But today, it's a bit more complicated, isn't it?
It's a double-edged sword, for sure. On the one hand, you have governments using technology for censorship and surveillance. On the other hand, technology can be a powerful tool for activism, for spreading awareness, and for connecting people across borders.
Right, like social media was instrumental in the Arab Spring uprisings.
Yeah.
It gave a voice to the voiceless and helped to organize protests.
Exactly. Technology itself isn't good or bad, it's how we use it and who controls it that matters.
Which is why digital literacy is so important these days. We need to be critical thinkers and be able to discern fact from fiction online.
Absolutely. We can't just blindly accept everything we see and hear. We need to question, to analyze, and to form our own opinions.
And that brings us to something that's maybe a bit more personal, the idea of self-censorship. We may not have literal thought police in today's world, but there's definitely a pressure to conform, especially on social media.
Oh, for sure. There's this fear of being canceled, of
Yeah.
being ostracized or attacked for expressing an opinion that goes against the grain.
So you end up not saying what you really think because you're afraid of the backlash.
It's a subtle form of control, isn't it? Even if it's not coming from the government, it can still have a chilling effect on free speech and open dialogue.
Right. And that can create a climate where only certain viewpoints are considered acceptable, which is the opposite of a free and open society.
Exactly. It stifles debate, discourages critical thinking, and ultimately weakens our democracy.
Okay, so after taking this deep dive into 1984 and its relevance to the world today, what's the takeaway here? What should we be thinking about?
Well, I think Orwell was issuing a warning, a reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted. We need to be vigilant about protecting our privacy, our right to free speech, and our right to think for ourselves.
It's like a call to action, to be informed, to engage in meaningful dialogue, to challenge authority, and to resist any attempts to control our thoughts and actions.
The future isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the choices we make today. So let's make sure we're making choices that lead to a more just, equitable, and free society.
Because the alternative, a world that resembles the dystopia of 1984, is not something any of us want to see come to pass.
It's a world we must actively work to avoid. The question is, are we up to the challenge?
And on that note, that's a wrap.
Until next time.
Keep thinking critically, folks.